So a couple details about this mechanism is I had the idea for these cam follower when I was playing with this 4-bar linkage. These are interesting because the bars always remain parallel. And I was thinking if you hold it like these vertically, then it tends to fall. So what I did is I extended one of the bars and I ended up with something like that. And then by extending that one, I could get these end to always be pushing up. So that end pushes up right here against the cam. So you can see it following the cam. And so the nice thing about that is that I don't have to use a spring. I just get the weight on this end to push up against the cam to create that cam follower. And the way I'm getting this waving motion, it's because each one of these panels, this one and that one, is attached to 2 cam followers. And if you look at them from behind, each set, so this is the front wave, has cams that are like slightly offset or are a different angle in relationship to the axle. So that way there is a sort of alternating motion. And then by having the panel attached on a hole that is relatively loose, then because they're slightly offset, that's how I get it to kind of rock back and forth. And so this panel back here is attached to these 2 cams. You can see it. This is the rear panel. And then after I had that, it was just a matter of kind of calibrating it to where I wanted it. And then I also wanted the boat, kind of astronaut kind of guy, to be moved up and down by the waves here, but to have kind of like its own independent motion in a way. So that's why I decided to hold it on its own. And the way that one is actuated is this circular wedge is what's pushing the boat up and down. And so by having it slightly circular, I kind of had like a sort of smooth motion. And then this is how I'm attaching, this is how I'm holding the ship. It's a little unusual, but it works. Another thing to note is that I wanted to use as little glue as possible when assembling these, because sometimes it's nice to take it apart and put it back together when you're figuring things out. So I think the entire thing is assembled with screws. So the main base is held together by these 3 screws using this simple joint. And that makes it fairly sturdy because I'm using this 1/2-inch birch plywood. And then the axle itself can be removed. That's why I'm using this kind of retainer. Because in the past I built some where I would have a single hole where things would go through, but then it would be really hard to assemble because you had to like push all the cams as you were pushing through all the holes, which makes life pretty hard. And then all the nuts and joints, the screws and the nuts that I'm using for all these joints, it's important to use this kind of nut, which is called nylon lock, nylock, or nylon insert nut, because they stick to the place where you leave them. So if you were to use this other kind of nut where like it doesn't have a nylon insert, you can see that it screws and unscrews really easy. So eventually this thing will come out of the calibration that you got for it. And the screws I'm using in this case are all 440 by half inch, which is really close to 3 millimeters for non-US folk, but these 440s are cheaper in the US. One exception to the screws and no glue is the way I pinned these to the axle, so you can see a little kind of wire pin sticking out. Same here. So these are not glued, which means I could potentially remove them if I needed to. The way I attach those, I wanted to stay in place, is I take a piece of wire, just like cheap steel wire, and then I cut a little bit and attach it to the end of a Dremel or a rotary tool, and then I make the hole with that onto the cam and directly through the axle, and then I snip a piece of wire and then kind of hammer it in there, and then you can like file them or sand them to have a smoother finish. Another exception to the glue is the way I glued these nuts in place. Here you can see that I embedded a screw and a nut onto a little plywood, and then I glued that to the ship itself. So even though those are glued, it doesn't stop me from disassembling the whole piece if I want it, or if I need to when I'm in the process of constructing it. As for the materials, I used a half-inch birch plywood for the main base. Then this is 8-inch or 3 millimeter birch plywood too. Most of these parts are laser cut. And then these are also laser cut, and the paint is gouache for the blue, and then acrylic ink for the whites and the blacks. And I finished them with some acrylic finish. And then for the handle, I turned it using a little walnut poplar that was glued together. I think it has like a neat effect. And that's one of those nylock nuts that retains that piece in place, that I just filed round so it looks a little bit nicer. Thanks for checking out the video.